My name is Kristen Taylor, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. So before we get started, I just have a few quick items to cover. First, we already have questions lined up that we're really excited to ask our three panelists. If you have questions for our panelists or about the tech salary report in general that come up during the webinar, please submit them using the control panel, and we'll make sure to answer them in the post on the DICE blog over the next week. Next, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, and a link will be sent via email, so please watch out for that. Also, there will be a post-webinar survey, and we'd love your feedback. And one last thing, we'll be talking a bit about remote work during this webinar, and all of us do happen to be working remotely as well. We feel confident that everything should run smoothly, but please bear with us if any technical difficulties pop up. Okay, so here's the plan for today. We're going to start off by meeting our exciting panel of presenters. We'll quickly introduce the DICE 2021 Tech Salary Report and some of the key findings, and then we'll have an extended Q&A with our panelists. And on that topic, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. So first, we have David Windley, President of IQTalent Partners. David, can you please share with us a little bit about your background and what brought you to where you are today?
Yes, yes, I'm David Windley, President of IQTalent Partners, part of Caldwell International. And I also just finished my stint as chairman of the SHRM board, Society for Human Resources Management, so I'm immediate past chair. Also on two public company boards, head up the compensation committee for that. And previous to those experiences, I have been an executive in HR at tech companies, Fusion.io, Yahoo, Microsoft, Intuit, and Silicon Graphics.
Thank you, David. And then next we have Sage Quiamno as the CEO and co-founder of Future for Us. Sage, can you please share with us a little bit about your background and experience?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sage Quiamno. I am the CEO and co-founder of Future for Us. It is a platform dedicated to advancing women of color at work through community, culture, and career development. We have over 10,000 women of color professionals, a part of our community, and we also consult in diversity, equity, inclusion for over half a dozen large and small tech companies, mostly in Seattle, Washington. It's a big honor to be here, and this year I was named Forbes 30 Under 30 under social entrepreneurship. So thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you, Sage. And last, we have Art Zeile as the President and Chief Executive Officer of DHI Group. Art, can you please tell us a little bit about your background and experience?
Absolutely. So DHI Group is the holding company for DICE as well as two other career platforms. And I started my career in the Air Force. Ultimately, I left and became a civilian and started that part of my career as a developer. And over the course of many years, I've actually started 3 different companies. So I consider myself to be an entrepreneur, and ultimately each one of those companies used DICE as a critical tool to find the right kind of talent. And so I think what I bring to the table for DHI Group is kind of a focus on product innovation and excellence, and that's what we're dedicated to at DHI Group.
Great, well, thank you, Art, and thanks again to all of our panelists for joining us today. All right, so for anyone that isn't familiar with our DICE Tech Salary Reports, let me quickly catch you up. For 16 years now, DICE has run tech salary reports covering salary trends related to locations, occupations, skills, and experience. In addition to the salary data, the report also gathers information related to benefit, preference, and satisfaction. This year's report was published on February 16th and featured survey responses for more than 9,000 technologists. So let's take a look at some of the key takeaways in the report. First, overall average technologist salaries in the US increased by 3.6% between 2019 and 2020, reaching $97,859, despite uncertainty caused by COVID-19. Next, Texas continues its journey toward becoming a premier tech state, potentially on the scale of California. Both states' tech hubs saw high salaries and steady increases, but Texas also boasts an inflow of prestigious companies building new headquarters and factories, including Oracle and Tesla. Also, 55% of technologists said they're satisfied with their current salaries. And last, while last year's tech salary report showed the rise of emerging benefits, wellness, and volunteer opportunities, this year's report illuminates the reemergence of staple benefits, such as health insurance and 401k, which is likely a collateral effect of COVID-19. Now that we've covered some high-level points, let's talk about salaries. When we look at occupations, we can see that the occupations experiencing the highest salaries were those that helped organizations analyze data, innovate their product offerings, and ensure organizations remained efficient and secure during the pandemic. And when we look at the disparities between the benefits that technologists consider important versus those that they actually have, we can see that training, education, flex schedule options, stock programs, remote schedule options, and 401k programs all showed the largest disparities. We also found that almost half of technologists believe that they're underpaid relative to other people with the same occupations and skill level. Meanwhile, only a third of technologists answered with a definitive no, that they don't think they're underpaid relative to others. All right, so now that we've introduced the 2021 Tech Salary Report, as well as a few key data points, I'd like to begin our Q&A with our panelists as we discuss their perspectives on some of these findings. All right, and then the first question that we have is for Sage. So Sage, so looking at the data from this year's report, 56% of technologists are satisfied with their salaries, which is up 6% from last year. While encouraging on the surface, can you speak to your perspective on why we might have seen such a big shift in 2020 and what we might expect to change as we move further into 2021?
Yeah, definitely. So, as we've all experienced as a collective and as a society and a community, the global pandemic and its effects and impacts on all industries, especially in tech. And this value, I'm really excited to have you have the report because it is super valuable and has given a lot of data points that you can use within your company. And some of the information is that, given the economic uncertainty from the pandemic, technologists have lowered their salary expectations, leading to higher levels of satisfaction, even if they felt like they were underpaid. For example, tech has actually been able to survive, also thrive through this pandemic because of its flexibility, but also because of the importance and value on the specific roles and tech roles. And so because a lot of industries weren't doing so well, people were losing jobs, technologists were able to secure and move forward with their positions. And so if they felt they're underpaid, they still were satisfied because they had health benefits. They had 401k packages, and that really left them satisfied with the positions. And those who claim that they're very satisfied rose from 16 to 22% year over year. So according to that report, 16 to 22% year over year, they said that they were quote unquote very satisfied, even though as the numbers are somewhat or dissatisfied dropped significantly. So we see through this report that technologists every year are being more satisfied with their roles and their salaries. And those same technologists may become less satisfied with their compensation once the economy starts stabilizing. So we start seeing this, right, in this year, Q1, we're wrapping up with Q1. And so then, in turn, we're going to see technologists hungrier for larger salaries, raises, and bonuses, but also an expansion of an entire salary packet. And so we really need to start thinking about how do we make how do we make sure that there's larger salaries, but also we know that technologists will be asking for that. And now that they're eyeing out more, what they say? We say staple benefits. So as I mentioned before, flexible work hours, paid vacation, health insurance has now been, that is a top line item for a lot of technologists. And then also a part of the data that was shared in this report is that 71% of those whose salaries increased in 2020 were content, but only 27 of those who didn't enjoy year over year salary bump also reported satisfaction. So we know that this is a hint that technologists were just happy to have their jobs. They were just happy to be employed. And this is going to be different as we move into this year and beyond.
Okay. Thank you for that insight, Sage.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, all right. And so David, our next question is for you. In many discussions related to salaries and compensation, the theme of negotiation often seems to rise. What advice would you give technologists to help them navigate the negotiation process? And what advice might you give recruiters and recruiting agencies and supporting this part of the relationship between technologists and hiring organizations?
Yeah, I think first of all, as a technologist, as a candidate, is to understand what is good, fair compensation for your skills and abilities. So having a good understanding of that going into the marketplace. So the DICE survey, surveys like this are great tools, great insight for people to have to understand the market. And then also I would say understand kind of your tolerance for trade-offs. Oftentimes with technologists, there's going to be a trade-off depending on the type of company that you might be entertaining between equity, right? So more risk versus cash compensation. And really understand that for yourself. I've been at this for a while, and you'll be surprised sometimes when you get to the compensation discussion and the candidate hasn't really thought that through, right? So as a candidate, understand your tolerance and what you're willing to trade off and so forth. And so then just turn that around for the recruiters. The flip side is to understand that from the candidate, right? Is to really understand what they believe is a fair comp, right? You can't ask people in many jurisdictions what their past pay was, but what you can and should ask is what are their expectations? What are they looking for? What do they think is appropriate sort of comp, right? In a total package. And then also understand their tolerances, because you're going to have levers to pull, as you negotiate, whether it's throwing in a sign-on bonus, whether it's throwing in more equity and making those trade-offs. So yes, for the recruiter, it's really understanding where the candidate's coming from on these issues.
No, that's great, David. That's some good points. And as a recruiter, I can relate to a lot of those. So thank you for sharing that. All right, and then Art. So you, next question is for you. It might be surprising to readers of this year's report that with the widespread economic impact of the pandemic in 2020, technologist salaries still increased 3.6% on average. Given these numbers and what you've seen thus far in the first quarter, what's your sense of technologist demand through 2021 and beyond?
Well, that's a great question. I'll tell you that at DHI Group, we're very fortunate that we have access to a lot of data. And what I mean by that is we're watching the postings that are taking place on our platforms. We're watching the applications. We're watching Bureau of Labor statistic reports. We have a partnership with a company called Burning Glass that actually scrapes all of the tech job postings across the United States every single night. So we're seeing a lot of data. And I'd say that the 3.6% increase is associated with the pressures in the market. Even at the low point last year during the pandemic, there was over 200,000 job postings in tech. And if you think about bringing that forward to January, there are 275,000 tech job postings, and that's up 12% from December, up 21% from November. And the bottom line is that the tech unemployment rate in February was 2.4%. And you juxtapose that against the overall unemployment rate across all occupations of 6.6%. And we are in a supply constrained environment. It's not the same as it was pre-pandemic. I mean, you look back at some of these figures, it was 1.6% unemployment for tech in February of 2020. But it just means that these folks are in demand. I think that a lot of things have changed at the end of last year. Obviously, we have the vaccines approved by the United States government. They're rolling out. People are feeling a lot more confident about their hiring plans for 2021, especially now that economists are predicting 6% GDP growth for the entire year, which is just stunning, like twice, maybe even arguably 3 times as much as we normally have in any one particular year. And so I think the backdrop is you have this pressure to essentially help companies digitize their business models, and that is going to require technologists. and technologists have been in demand. They will continue and accelerate in terms of their demand, and that's going to be putting pressure on salaries as well as benefits and all the other things that we've talked about just over the course of these few questions.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Art. All right, and then next it's actually time for our first polling question. So we'll pull that up. Have you experienced an increase in recruiting activity in the first quarter of 2021 compared to 2020? And we'll wait a few moments while the polling answers roll in. All right, well, it looks like majority of people have said yes, and I think we're experiencing that, ourselves and a lot of all of our organizations as well. David, in your recruiting organization, was this something that you expected as a result? Are you seeing this as well?
Yeah, so this doesn't surprise us. We've seen since the fall, especially in the technology industry, which is most of our clients, hiring come roaring back, and it's just increased month by month. And so right now it's a crescendo, really. And as Art mentioned, with the GDP expectations, I think we're still in it, right? So this is not the height. I think it will continue, at least for the next few months. I think the first half of this year, we're going to see a lot of hiring coming back from technology companies.
Thank you, David. All right, and this next question is actually, Art, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
No, I'm good.
All right, this next question is actually for all three of you panelists, but I'd like to, Sage, if you could start us off. According to the report, 72% of technologists consider remote work options important. Given this data and where we stand today, what are your thoughts about remote and flexible work over the long term, and on how organizations should be looking at it if and how to return employees to physical offices?
Definitely, yeah. So work from home, flexibility and work from home is going to be imperative. This is going to be a value for a lot of technologists, especially. We've learned last year that employees are actually really productive during this time with work from home. And so now companies are going to have to start integrating that into their packages and also offering that. And so we see in a lot of, especially in our community of women of color professionals, majority in tech, that's what they're looking for when they are being recruited by other companies competitively too. So that's going to be important for a long-term term goal, but also just a value for, especially for diverse candidates.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just agree that for especially knowledge worker type jobs, professional jobs, knowledge worker jobs, which most of the tech industry technologist jobs fit. We've had a grand experiment over the last year, and I think it's proven to a lot of skeptics. I mean, pre-COVID, there were definitely a trend towards flexibility and working away from the office, and I think and now with the grand experiment, I think more people are convinced that it can work. In fact, in some cases, it's people are more productive, and then the employees themselves, I think, are going to demand more flexibility. So I see a hybrid approach coming back, and everyone has to really look at the nature of the jobs, the nature of the work and the teams they interact with, and find that right mix of where you want to get teams together for serendipity and brainstorming and other activities that definitely are beneficial being together, weighed against the benefits and the demands of employees going to want to work, or at least partially remotely.
And I would agree with everything that's been said. Kristen, I'll tell you that what's fascinating to me is that we've been doing these candidate sentiment surveys for years. I mean, that one of them is really the genesis of the salary report itself. And I can tell you that even prior to the pandemic, technology workers wanted to work from home or have more flexible options to work from home. So this isn't anything that's particularly new. I think that most management teams thought that we were going to drop productivity. There's an interesting study that was released by PwC at the beginning of this year where they asked level executives what they think about productivity in the work from home environment, and a staggering 83% thought that their teams were effective and more productive. In our sentiment surveys last year, technologists, I think the statistic was 56% believed that they were more productive working from home than working from the office because they were eliminating distractions. They were eliminating their commute, both directions. And the idea that culture would suffer actually wasn't validated by any of our candidate sentiment surveys. They believe that we can still embrace culture. You have to work harder. You have to do things a little bit differently. But this environment, in my opinion, is here to stay. I don't think that work from home becomes the norm for most companies, like complete work from home 100% of the time. I don't believe most companies give up their offices. I think it is going to be a hybrid world. And to David's point, you know, this has been a grand experiment, but the experiment worked. And so people are going to use that as part of their strategy planning for the future.
Now, all good points, and I think we're seeing that also from a candidate perspective, and you know, response rates with remote positions tend to be a little bit higher. So, all right. So then, David, the next question is for you. While so many organizations are either completely or primarily remote, what are some of the considerations that employers can and should take while recruiting candidates remotely?
Yeah, I think we touched on it just a little while ago with this last question, but I'd say three things. One, consider the nature of the job, right? Is this the type of role that can be done remotely or primarily remotely? The nature of the person, the candidate, right? Is this someone that is a self-starter? Is someone that can operate well in a remote environment? Because there are situations where certain people thrive and certain people may need the structure or may need the contact more with their colleagues. So that's something to consider when you think about whom, you know, is able to work remotely. And then the nature of the team dynamics. So what is the nature of the team dynamics, and can this role within this team operate effectively remotely? So I think, you know, thinking about those three factors will guide you in determining, you know, what roles can be and should be done remotely.
Thank you, David. Okay, Sage, next question is for you. For many organizations and recruiters, even as recruiting begins to pick up, finding and attracting diverse candidates continues to be a challenge. What are some of the ways organizations can start to build a more diverse talent pipeline and workforce?
The million-dollar question, yes. You know, here's a list that I have. Number one is to proactively source candidates. So making sure that you're proactively sourcing candidates from underrepresented groups. Two is to get involved with institutions / organizations representing underrepresented groups. So for instance, Future for Us, my company, being able to sponsor these institutions that support people from marginalized identities and build relationships with those members. These might include women, LGBTQI organizations, or any other minority professional groups. Get the rest of your workforce involved by offering stipends for employees to join these groups or even attend events. For example, there's Black Women in Tech. Grace Hopper is the largest nonprofit organization that brings young female technologist roles and talent, advancing women in technology, out in tech, etc. So the list goes on and on. There's tons of organizations like mine out there who are collecting and also managing and also building up underrepresented technologists and moving them into new roles and companies. So getting involved and actually sponsoring and investing is an important thing to do. Third is to ask more for ask for more diverse referrals from your employees. So give your colleagues some direction by asking them specifically for candidates from underrepresented groups. Also, gather advice from your employee resource groups. So really leveraging and utilizing your ERG groups. Your employee resource groups can be a tremendous resource for building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Getting their advice and feedback on how you can attract more a diverse pipeline will be essential. For instance, your LGBTQI group may point out that inclusive healthcare benefits may be a huge selling point within their community. So those, just utilizing your ERG groups. If you have some, if you have a couple, please, I mean, I really stress the importance of that. And next is reverse engineering your job descriptions to focus more on potential over credentials. So that means looking at where your new hire can be in 10 to 20 years and working backwards to figure out where that person is today and what they'll need to succeed and be successful at the company. This means helping your hiring manager to codify potential. So codifying potential is a big importance on that. Next is organizing unconscious bias training. I'm sure a lot of folks have been investing in unconscious bias training within their companies. Ensuring interview panels are actually representing your organization. So if you are recruiting women, making sure that there are women on your interview panels. And then last but not least, but challenging potential biases. So actually building out and using a criteria that was set during a kickoff meeting. And using specific examples from the interview to determine whether the candidate fits the criteria, and really challenging the opinions and decisions that you may feel that's rooted in conscious bias to ensure like a fair decision-making process. So I mean, the list goes on and on, but these are some of the tips. And at the end of the day, it's helpful to track conversion rates. And understanding at what stage are we losing these candidates, and following the data closely so you can make more informed decision in the hiring process. So those are some of my tips that I have.
Yeah, I just want to echo, if you don't mind, what Sage said. A couple things on the talent acquisition and recruiting side that Sage mentioned that I think are absolutely key and fairly simple to stick with, but you need discipline, right? So the one is to source candidates. I think so much of the recruiting motion is the networking, right? Whether it's employee referrals, whether it's even your recruiters, you take an executive search firm, mostly they start with the people they know, right? That's what they pitch. Hey, I'm in this industry, I know these people. I think you need to insist that you do an exhaustive source, right? Not just people you know, but anyone that meets the criterion for your job. You should have identified them and start with that list. I think that in and of itself is a big, if everyone were to do that, we'd have more diverse people being considered, because these are people you didn't know, or your employees didn't know, or your recruiters didn't even know, right? So forcing people to really do exhaustive sourcing against the specification to start with. And then, as Sage mentioned, I think the interview process is really fraught, where you get the diverse candidates, but then they fall out. And sticking to a disciplined criterion that's objective, as Sage mentioned, what you guys agreed to at the beginning. And then the last one is having a diverse panel, diverse interview. Because even if you have these criterion based on competencies or objective, if everyone around the room still has the bias, they're going to still see that unconscious bias in the same way. And often having, that female engineer on that panel will notice when someone, said something that, well, that person didn't seem as qualified for this. But you didn't say that about Joe. So I think those are three things that are very key.
And I would echo, Kristen, that we're seeing this as one of the hottest topics discussed among all of our clients. And we've shifted from physical career events last year to virtual, of course. And I can tell you that even right now, about 2/3 of our career events focus on diversity hiring and sourcing.
No, thank you all. Some great points. I think that you guys have brought up some really good points as well, just about shifting focus since COVID hit and how things have changed, but also from attracting candidates is one thing, but the interview process is a whole nother thing that we need to be mindful of as well. So our next question is for you. Can you share your thoughts on some of the tech occupations that are experiencing the most growth in salaries? What, if any, signals does the data send for what's happening now and what's to come in tech?
Yes, in fact, I'll focus on 3 different positions that I think are of interest, especially in the tech recruiting community. The first would be cybersecurity analyst. Of all positions, that's the one that went up the highest in terms of salary expectations last year. It increased 16.3%. And it's pretty obvious that when you go to a work from home environment, the cybersecurity issues are paramount. It means that we're operating in a different environment that really involves both, in-office kind of operations, but also work from home operations. They say that this last year has been almost like a hacker's holiday, and clearly that even extends to the government. Sorry for my dog in the background, incidentally. I must have seen a rabbit or something for a minute there. But again, cybersecurity analyst, I think, is a trend for the future. It really means that as we emerge from the pandemic in this hybrid mode, it puts more stresses on our systems. It means that we need more cybersecurity excellence embedded inside of our organization. The second important trend is similar to this, and that's associated with tech support. Obviously, tech support becomes more complicated as we work from home and have this hybrid environment in the future. Salaries associated with tech support went up by 8.2% last year. And so again, this idea of what our world transforms to obviously informs the positions that we need and also puts pressure on salaries. The last trend that I'll speak to is data science. Obviously, as we move forward in time, there's more business models that are being transformed by the gathering and the analysis of data. Even preceding the pandemic, the data science positions that we were tracking had pretty much a 0% unemployment rate. And so the salary associated with data science engineer went up 12.8% year over year as part of our salary survey, which all makes sense. I can tell you that one of the alerts that I've set up for myself as a DICE candidate has been for data scientist. It literally is data scientist, Greenwood Village, Colorado, where I live. And I can tell you that last year I'd get about maybe 20 potential job postings. That's expanded to over 100 as of today. And that's because a lot of these positions have gone remote as people have realized it's hard to find data scientists. So I'm just going to make this a remote position. And it's that kind of position that lends itself to being remote. But again, I would say cybersecurity analyst, tech support, data science are 3 positions that are clearly seeing increasing demand, and therefore the salaries are going up accordingly.
Great. No, thank you for sharing that, Art. I think we can agree that it's more difficult to attract some of the data scientists as well as the cybersecurity when we're working on those positions. It's tougher to get those responses because I think they are flooded with recruiters, wanting them for their positions as well. So thank you for sharing that. All right, and then now it's actually time for our next polling question. All right, so which of the following best represents your perspective on the remainder of 2021 from a recruiting standpoint? And we'll give the audience a few moments to answer this. All right, well, it looks like majority agreed that hiring activity will increase. I'd like to ask, Art or Sage, would you guys, either of you want to comment on this? I think we've talked about this a little bit, but it sounds like it's kind of unanimous that recruiting activity will continue to increase, but wanted to give you guys that opportunity to comment.
Sage, if you wanted to say something, I definitely have a comment on this as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we see this within our own community. So as a community of, women of color technologists, we've seen a lot of companies investing in posting jobs. So we have seen at least a 60% increase from the starting of 2020 to 2021. So we're working with, I would say, more than half again, with more companies who are investing in hiring diverse candidates, but also specifically for tech. So we see an increase in hiring, just investment in this. So that's on my end and my perspective as a community leader.
And I can tell you that, my view is that as a hiring platform, helping people to source candidates, people's perception of their future significantly affects their hiring plans. It makes all the sense in the world. As they gain confidence, they firm up their hiring plans. And so we saw a dramatic change with November, the vaccines being approved by the government, the vaccines starting to be distributed, with everybody feeling better about their economic future in 2021. We saw a dramatic change in terms of the activity on the site, job postings, bookings, everything from basically the middle of November forward. And it continues to accelerate in Q1.
Thank you both. All right, Sage, this next question's for you. So you've spoken to the hiring side of things, but for many organizations, retention is just as critical an issue when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially given that most technologists want to stay in technology at a fairly high interest in staying with their current organization. Do you have thoughts on how organizations can go about retaining their highly skilled, diverse technologists who are likely to be targets for other companies?
Yeah, so I think beginning with an inclusive company culture. So gathering employee gathering employee feedback through surveys, review sites, exit interviews, and learn how you can improve your culture and making your company a more welcoming and inclusive place to work. I think last year, through a lot of social movements, especially the Black Lives Matter movement, companies and brands have now really looked at how can they build their company and create a more equitable workplace for diverse candidates, but also their employees especially, and making sure that you promote your culture throughout your employer branding materials, your websites. But we also know that diverse candidates are the most educated, they're smart, they are looking your company up on websites, they are power mapping on LinkedIn, they are looking at leadership. Who has power within their company, and are they creating opportunities within the company and within their company to promote them? And so beginning with an inclusive company culture. Second will be companies need to invest and prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion as a top line item. As Art has explained, diversity, equity, inclusion right now is one of the hottest topic right now, and what companies are using to really attract more diverse candidates, but creating a more equitable workplace and setting goals to that. So taking stock of where you stand on diversity, equity, inclusion, where does your company stand, and set a time box goals to address areas of improvement. So companies really need to start investing in that and making sure that they're actually, whether it's hiring a third party person, a company to come in and consult, like, ourselves, like as Future for Us, or they actually build out a whole department for diversity, equity, inclusion, as we've seen a lot of top tech companies have been doing. Third is addressing unconscious bias, as I have mentioned in the last question. Supporting the creation of communities within your organization. Again, investing and putting money into ERG groups is really important. Training your managers to lead diverse teams. Creating paths of growth. So making sure that your growth is actually transparent to your employees, making sure that there are goals, right? When I mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion goals, making sure that the company understands that and your employees sees, what that roadmap looks like. And creating a more mentorship and sponsorship opportunities. As a community of women of color professionals, we know that women are supported at the hiring, the entry level, but it's that middle management where women are stuck, and especially women of color. So making sure that you create mentorship and sponsorship opportunities to get more women or marginalized employees into the leadership roles. And so those are kind of just some of the ways that you can retain your diverse employees and at the end of the day, is like creating like a formal retention plan as well. We call it stay interviews, so making sure that you check in with your employees. The recommended cadence is around like two times a year. But I would also like to stress standing in solidarity with your diverse employees. So making sure that your employees are heard, seen, and acknowledging and representing their voices. I think that's going to be really important when you're hiring and retaining these employees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sage. David, did you want to comment on that as well?
No, I said that's great. Great advice.
With it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are actually nearly at time, but I just wanted to share a reminder that there will be a recording of today's webinar that'll be sent via email later this week. But I would like to ask each of our panelists if they could provide us with one final thought. So if you guys, David, if you could start us off in providing just a final thought or takeaway on salary and compensation trends for technologists now or in the future.
Well, I think, the market was tight prior to COVID. There was a slight, dip, but it's coming back strong. And I think the long-term trends are clear that there's a skills gap, and technologists are going to be in demand for a long time. And the way that the GDP is shifting more and more is moving towards technologists, technology companies, or tech-enabled companies, right? It's just the way of the future. So this will continue to be a hot area. And yes, salary is important, but what I would say is that companies, recruiters, others need to look at the other factors that will attract technologists to your companies. And I think most good technologists, they want good work with good people at a good company, right? So if you keep that in mind, those are some of the things to think about. So how do you compete as a company, right? What's your brand? What's your mission? Is that something that people want to be part of? What's the culture? What's the people that these candidates are going to work with? What is that culture like? That's a big attractor. And then ultimately, for most technologists, it's the work, right? They want interesting, exciting work, a work that's going to help them build up their skills and help them with their career. And so if you keep that in mind, right, most technologists want good work with good people at a good company.
Thank you, David. Art, can you start us off next?
Oh, yes. So I would affirm everything that David just said. In fact, I always say that technologists are very well aware of the fact that any particular skill has a half-life of about 5 years today. And as a Fortran programmer, I have very few job opportunities available to me at this point in time. So the broader scope is exactly what David said, which is, we see a lot of companies recognizing that they need to digitize their business models, that they need to be tech-enabled, that they need to lean into tech. So companies like Geico and Home Depot are fighting just as vigorously as folks that you'd say are in the tech vertical. And I think that there's this one astounding statistic that I read last year that kind of speaks to it all. Microsoft came up with a study in July where they estimated that the number of digital workers worldwide would grow from 42 million in 2020 to over 190 million by 2025. Now that's 5 years, that's the entire world, but it shows the demand for technologists, not only in the United States, but across the entire world.
Wow, that's huge. Thank you for sharing that. Sage?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so my final thought is that we need to invest in diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. It's no longer an ethical and moral imperative. It is a business imperative to be more competitive in the job market, but also to hiring, especially diverse candidates. People of color will be the majority in the workforce by 2040. So if you are not creating a more equitable workplace, especially in tech, you're going to fall behind. And so making sure that you create an equitable workplace for everyone will be it will be so important for the next couple years into the decades. And so my final thought is to use this tool, use this report, use this survey, spread this knowledge, put it on LinkedIn, and really disperse this to communities of marginalized identities for those who are going to be the new workforce. I really, this report is so great. I sent it out in an email to our community, and we're excited to see what that people do with this information.
Great. Well, and then thanks everyone again for joining us, and of course, thank you to our panelists for your participation today. Really enjoyed hearing about your perspectives on the DICE Tech Salary Report.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.